Hello, welcome to my channel. Let's create different type of players using mirror. If you are familiar with Photon, you can do it simply using different prefabs and upload them from resources folder. But in mirror, it's quite different. As you see, we will create different players, red, blue, yellow, and then we'll sync their movement. Let's start the development. Let's create our own network manager with name custom network manager and open it. Now let's inherit network manager. For that we need to include mirror package or namespace. Let's remove this, we don't need this. Okay, let's create an empty game object and add our custom network manager on it, naming it network manager, adding our custom network manager on it, and resetting the transform. Well, you can see network manager inherited properties in the inspector. Now we will add one more component, KCP transport, over here. You can use simple web transport for WebGL and multiplex transport for both WebGL and KCP. Assigning KCP transport to transport variable in custom network manager. Here we come to the main point. This is the player prefab that will remain same on all the clients, and every client's player prefab will be the child of this prefab. Let's create mirror player prefab. Creating a new game object and naming it as mirror player, and reset the transform and just drag and drop it here so that prefab can be created. And now assigning it to network manager, but it will not be assigned. You can see the error here down. When I will assign here, you can see the error. So the error shows that network identity should be there on the player prefab. So we will add the network identity here, overriding the changes. Let's try to assign it back. So now it is assigned over here. Clear the console. Well, I already have created some players. So this is the blue player prefab, this is red player prefab, and this is yellow player prefab. The point here is to make these prefab the child of the main mirror player prefab. Let's create a script for mirror player prefab. So that will be the handler script that will handle this particular prefab. So let's create the script. First thing first. Now we will inherit network behavior which perform high level API functions such as commands, client RPCs, and this will work with game objects that have network identity. Now let's add it to the mirror player prefab. Not going into the optimized code, I will take the reference of all the players here. I mean your character player. Here we have the capsule red, blue and yellow. Let's assign all our client prefabs here. This is just for the reference purpose. We can have it in another ways as well. And now we will take a variable that will help us to load the player prefab from the above array. 0 for blue, 1 for red and 2 for yellow.
This. So let's assume this is our first client that spawned, and this is the second client that spawned after the first client. So second client player handler will connect to the server, and this will send the client RPC to its player handler which exists on the client 1. So once this will be spawned, this will tell, hey, this is my red, blue or yellow player that need to be spawned on the client 1 as well. Similarly, once client 3 will be spawned, client 3 will send the RPC call through the server to the player handlers that exist on other clients, client 2 and client 1. So this will tell, hey, this is my, I have a yellow color player, so spawn the yellow color player here. So this is the simple step. But the problem here is Once the new client is spawned, it tells to the existing client, but new client don't know about the existing client players. So this also need to know about 2 and 1, and this client 2 also need to know about 1. So this is we have to achieve. We will do it step by step.
Let's do some code. We will simply put a check for if the player is local or not.
Let's create a function that will help us to spawn one of the red, blue, yellow player into our client. Now setting its rotation and position to 0, 0, 0. Let's make a client RPC call that will help us to spawn the type of our player from red, blue, yellow. So this is how we write the client RPC call. Another function to call the RPC function. Let's put the player number we want to load from our 3 players. Time to call it from the server. Whenever a player will be spawned on the server, then we will call this function. We will check which player gets spawned, so we will get its player handler, and then we will call its load function that will call on all the clients, existing clients. Here we go with the first phase. Let's try to create the build. Player is assigned. All 3 players are also assigned. Let's add the HUD so that we will able to connect to the client. Okay, so let's create the build. The build is ready. All right, because we have 0 for build, so we will put it 1 for this, and let's play. Okay, so let's create the host. So this is our player. Let's run the client. It's connected, and you can see on the host side there are 2 players but on the same position, so that's why they are not visible. So let's change the position a bit. Okay, so as you can see there are 2 players, but if you'll see we had the blue player for the client side. Let me show you. Just stop it and host from the build and client from the editor. As you can see now, I can see the blue, but the host player doesn't have its character inside it. This is our player. I can see my character. Let's resolve this issue. First of all, let's create some spawn points so that every time the player will not spawn on the same point, so different player will spawn on the different points. Now add network start position. That's actually the class from the mirror. And let's duplicate it and make the more points so that we have multiple points. Time to resolve the issue. One of the character node gets spawned on another client. So this happened because on server called first and the player handle doesn't initialize till that time. So let's initialize it first using this function. So we'll make a action, so that will be called once the player will be initialized, and once that will be initialized, then the server call will be done. Now changing it from direct call to the action. So once that action will be invoked, then this load player to all client will be called. So simply creating a new function. Let's name it on player initialization, and replace this function with the function that have the action that we just write in player handler, and from there just call it on player initialization, so that once player handler will be initialized, it will call on player initialization, keeping the reference of network connection to the client. Save the reference of the connection here, so that we will use this later on the function on player initialization. Now call the same function that we initially called in on server add player, that is a load player to all client. Now time to tell the player handler exist on the server of this player about the initialization of the player handler on the client side. Command will help us to do this. Let's make a quick function and call it from the start. That means our this script has been initialized, passing the player number that we want to spawn, telling the server player handler about the player we want to spawn. And now the action call, we will invoke this action here. Let's have a look on everything. Everything is good to go. Yes. Let's create the build. Setting the number to 0 as we did initially. The build will have blue player. Setting editor player back to 1, that means the red player for the editor. Oh, forget to add network transform. Let's add it now. Network transform will help us to see the player movement on other side. Let's add it. Let's check everything is good to go. Yes. Let's do the same process again. Put the player to load to 0 for the build and create the build again. Editor player back to 1. The red player for the editor. Let's play. Host from the editor. Here our player is red player. Now client join. Client player is blue, and you can see the blue is there on the host side, but as you can see, host player is not spawned on the client side. Let's resolve this issue. As we mentioned, the player who joined later don't know about the initial players, so we have to tell the player who joined later about the initial players. So every player who initially joined will directly call their function to the target player who joined later. So we are using target RPC here, not the client RPC, so that we can target only the player who have joined later. Creating a target RPC function, TRP for target RPC, load all player to target connection, and now call the same function that we called from the client RPC, that is spawn player with the player number. The first argument of target RPC need to be added as network connection to client. So we'll add this. Second will be our player number. So this is the syntax that you can check on the mirror document. Time to call that function from the server. Let's collect all the player handlers in an array so that every player handler will call their respective prefabs on the new joined player. So this might not be that good code because finding the object of type is not the good, but just for the purpose to let you understand, I'm taking it find object of all types player handler, and the for loop for every player. So every player will call their respective prefabs on the new joint client. Not to directly call the target RPC directly from other script. Let's create a function that will internally call the target RPC just to keep a track. Now time to call it from the for loop for every player. Please remember the code is not fully optimized. This code is specially written just to show how we can create different players. You can optimize it on your own way. Now time to create the final build. Let's create the build with the different player numbers to load. Let's run it. Host from the editor. I can see my player blue, and now joining the client. Yes, I can see both the different players, but there is one more issue, that is, if you can see, for multiple calls the same player gets spawned again. Let's try to put a boolean when the player gets spawned, so that we will check if the player is already spawned, it will not spawn again on the next call. Let's add a boolean if player is spawned. and just add it here. If it already spawned, then return back from the function. Time to rebuild and check. So now we have two clients. Let's start it again. Play the editor. Hosting from the editor. I can see my yellow player. Now one client joined, another client joined. You can see every player gets spawned on all the clients, and you even can see the movements.